All right, one of the topics that I wanted to discuss was the UK becoming more Muslim. We've been seeing rallies in Germany and discussions of Muslim neighborhoods in Britain that people say they can't go to out of fear. And I was just thinking about the spread of Islam in the UK. I would say a Christian country, but not really. I think the percent of people who actually attend church is very, very low in Europe. So it's kind of like probably a deistic society more than a Christian society.
No, it's definitely Catholic.
Well, I mean,
it's the Church of England.
Yeah.
Catholicism is definitely still prevalent in England.
Yeah, but the percent of people who actually go to church and stuff is very low.
If the data point that we're considering is church attendance, then yeah, I mean it's low, but that doesn't mean people aren't religious. It just means
people are religious. But I'm just
it doesn't
saying
mean they're not Catholic either. It's just they're not active church goers.
And as far as I know, when I've heard people talk about it, it's rude to even bring up religion in Europe. So
yes,
that's not something you would ask. Like where I
true.
come from, that's like one of the first things people ask you is, what church do you go to, blah, blah, blah.
We come from the same place. Nobody asks this question.
Oh, yes.
No.
Yeah, well, people ask me that a lot.
It comes up in conversation, but it's
that
not
would
the
never
first thing they ask.
No,
they care about it.
That's something early on that'll come up.
Since we come from the same place, it is something that people care about. But initially, if you're just talking to people, it likely won't come up in conversation unless that person wants to spend time with you and you're, brought into the social circle of the people who go to that church. And where we come from, there's a lot of different churches, like a lot of different denominations.
In my experience, it didn't take many conversations in before someone brought up either they were going to church and what church you go to and stuff like that. So I was just comparing that to Europe because as far as I know, it's actually rude to bring it up, so nobody brings it up. So that's all I was saying.
Europe has a very different culture. I think, I've been, you haven't been yet, but one of the things that kind of struck me when I was there, and I went to different parts, so England and France. I liked France more than I liked England, but they were both unique culturally in their own ways. But one thing that did strike me is France was more diverse than England. Like, people kept to themselves. Everything's kind of like your religion is personal, your medical history, your medical whatever is personal. They definitely respect privacy in Europe. So culturally, I think that's a little bit different. But going back to your topic, do we think that culture is kind of shifting?
From what I see, obviously we're looking at it from a distance. I don't know anybody in those countries personally that I can talk to about it. But just from a distance, I see a culture who is in between, I'd say, like non-religious and the common Christian in America who says they believe in Jesus, but they don't know anything about the New Testament. They don't know anything about the history of Christianity. They don't know anything about it at all, but they just believe. I think there's a lot of people like that in Europe. If they do believe, that's how they believe. And what I think they are is that they are an easy ground for somebody to bring religion into. And as far as I know, Muslims have very large families compared to the surrounding population. I feel like that's going to be the trend.
I think there was a time where Europe, because their borders weren't closed, Europe was fertile breeding ground for new ideas, new religion. But there's been a backlash against that. European countries saying enough is enough with immigration, no more. And so there's been a push to have European Union nations like Greece and Italy close their borders. Greece, Italy, and Spain, and Morocco close their borders and beef up their border patrol and beef up their Coast Guard with funding from the government. and strengthen their border crossings to the point where it's almost like dangerous. Actually, no, it is dangerous now to cross borders, and it could actually get you killed, and depending on the border that you're trying to cross. I think that there is possibly a heavy Muslim influence in the UK. I mean, for decades, Middle Eastern countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, I mean, even to some smaller extent, Iran, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, the royal families of these countries were sending their children and their relatives to the UK, to European countries to get trained, to get educated, rather.
Well, obviously, I don't think that's the issue at all. The issue was the war in the Middle East. So many people were displaced and fleeing, and one of the main places they fled to was across the Mediterranean.
Well, we're talking about two different things. I'm talking about the ruling class of these countries sending their children
To get educated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about like the Syrian civil war and
Iraq, Afghanistan,
the Kurdish rebels.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, but the Kurdish rebels, they really don't have anywhere to go. They're kind of landlocked. But Iraqis, there's also Tunisia, the whole Horn of Africa area that covered the Mediterranean saw a lot of strife and migration. The Sudan and South Sudan, they're still experiencing a significant amount of conflict. And so people, they fled their country to get education and seek refuge in Europe. But it's gotten to a point where now the borders are being closed, so whoever's inside of the interior of the European Union or the UK, they're there. And so they're trying to set up communities, they're trying to assimilate into their host nation's culture. But what you're seeing is kind of like a backlash where there are, for instance, in Germany, the far right, I think it's called the AfD. It's like a very conservative group in Germany.
I don't remember, but I know you're talking about because I saw a thing about their rallies.
Yes, Elon, basically, he went on, I guess, one of their events. He did like a webinar with them and basically was encouraging them to continue with their movement, and was throwing his support behind their political movement. There is an extent to which, and I don't see that this is necessarily right or wrong, it just is, with the people of a particular nation, there is a point to where they become frustrated and they feel as if they are possibly being replaced. Now, I'm not saying I'm not trying to espouse replacement conspiracy theories, but I think it is logical to assume that if more than one type of a group of people come into your country and start to outnumber you, logically, the thinking that you're going to have is, do they speak, for instance, let's stick with the example of Germany, do they speak German? Do they share our values? Do they share our ethics? Do they share our form of governance? Do they share our religion? That's a big thing. And if there's a disparity between these two groups of people, and when it comes to religion there is, host nation citizens are going to get, understandably, a little bit nervous. And again, I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, I'm just saying it's natural. It is natural for people to feel that way. I'll give you a quick example in the United States. So, for large periods of time in American history, after the American Revolution, but before the American Civil War, there was a movement into the West. Ken Burns has a documentary on this. It's called Into the West. It's both fascinating and amazing in equal breadth. And there are large swaths of Mexican-American territory or Spanish territory that had been annexed by the state of Mexico. So that was Texas, that was California, that was New Mexico. Vast swaths of what is now the United States, the southern border states with Mexico, used to be independent Spanish provinces, but then were annexed by the state of Mexico. Okay, well, what ended up happening is white settlers started moving from the eastern seaboard colonies or states after the American Revolutionary War in droves to the west. And what they started to do was outnumber the Texacanos, the Californios. These are the names that were given to the natural natives of the environment who were Hispanic. And they started to be replaced. Why? Because there was more of them than the natives. So this idea that replacement theory is just a conspiracy theory is not true, because it happened initially here. And it's happened throughout time and again throughout human history. human civilization. But there's an example of where it actually happened, and it happened in such ways that were both equal measure disgusting and illegal and cruel. Just some of the examples that come to mind were pretty brutal. What white settlers were doing to the natives on this land, forcing them off their land. In some cases, their homes were broken into in the middle of the night. They were threatened. They were violently assaulted, and land was stolen from them. So now you fast forward to what we're seeing today in places like Germany and other parts of Europe. You know, could it happen there? I think it depends on what we're talking about. I think if Europe still existed in the mindset pre-Ukraine war, I think the answer would be yes. But the Ukraine war really opened the eyes, I would say, of a lot of European leaders. So much so that they recognized that they had a dependence on Russian oil. And that dependency weakened them. Now, how that plays into majority Muslim communities replacing native white citizens, it depends.
No, I'm not saying that. I know we disagree on this, but when I think of dystopian futures, people will become more religious. If you think religion is going away, people are becoming more and more non-religious, I think this is a case where you have people who are basically ripe for the picking. We live in strange and desperate times, and then you have a religion that gives you order, gives you a way to structure your life, gives you meaning and purpose. I think people are losing that kind of...
But arguably all religions have some way of providing meaning and purpose.
I know, but see, Christian doesn't work over there anymore. People become apathetic in the UK to Christianity, right?
I completely disagree.
So what I'm saying is, if someone comes in there with a Christian message, I think it's more easy for them to be like, yeah, whatever.
Because they've heard it before.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they've already rejected it, right? No, reject it in the sense that they don't take it as serious. All you have to do is, I listened to the podcast recently about 30-year war. There was a time where they took it mad serious. You were a different form of Christian, your ass is grass.
Yeah.
Okay?
I mean, that's
now,
true history.
they're like, let's not even talk about it. They don't even really believe it.
I think that matters more in America, but in certain situations it matters. But not generally. It's like, Christian is Christian even though you're a denomination under that umbrella.
I think nowadays they really much more try to be one glob, right? Before it used to be, we're very specific groups.
Well, that's my point.
And we don't like each other.
That's my point. That's
now they're just like, hey, we can all get together.
You're pointing out something that I'm pointing to, which is, I think decades ago, the possibility of that idea being replaced was more likely.
I'm not saying replaced. I'm saying assimilated.
So you're saying they cast off their Christian teachings and take on... So there's different types of sects of Islam. You know, there's Sunni, there's Shia.
But the big one is Sunni, right?
I mean, there's Wahhabism, there's Kurdish.
I know, but that's under Sunni.
I don't pretend to be a scholar of Islam.
Yeah.
I just know at a high level, there's different sects of it. And I've said this to you many times before, that Majid Nawaz has once said that he believes that Islam needs to have its own New Testament. I'll just say this, that there is a possibility that because of the European Union's focus and care on privacy, that there is a possibility for a new type of Islam to kind of evolve out of this homogenous environment that values privacy, that values freedom of speech, and fuses with a new version of Islam. And I think there's an opportunity there. Now, who's going to lead that movement?
Like the Christian prosperity gospel, right? It's capitalism and Christianity fused together. Well, God wants you to open a new business and be successful. Joel Osteen, you know him? He's a huge megachurch pastor, I think in Texas. Yeah. And basically, his messages are, he starts and he'll read one sentence out of the Bible, and then he'll go on to a joke or a light slice of life story, and how God wants your family to be successful, for you to have a big bank account, and have a new car, and then everybody leaves.
I mean, I can see how that becomes popular in America.
Yeah, exactly.
It's adopting capitalist ethos.
So you're saying something similar, where
I think
Islam can fuse with
I think that
Western capitalism
Yeah.
and become prosperity Islam.
Yeah, and I think that's more likely because, for instance, in the UK, as many Muslims can go to the UK as the government will allow to come into the UK, but the real power structure in the UK is not the government, it's the monarchy. And the monarchy, so long as it remains white Christians, it doesn't matter the type of Christians they are. They are the ones who are going to determine how much Muslims are allowed in and how shifts in religion are going to adapt or fall. They have the power to keep them where they are at if they're assimilating, or they have the power to deport them if they're not.
I don't believe that at all.
Well, I mean, I've been there. So
Okay,
I can tell
well,
you that
the population of
doesn't
Muslims
matter.
is growing and growing over there.
Doesn't matter.
They're opening more mosques. So
doesn't matter.
okay, and
They
okay,
have,
so when are they?
that doesn't matter.
Okay, so when are they doing something about it, these monarchs?
Why do they need to?
Okay, so when do they do it? When they're 30% Muslim? When they're 50% Muslim?
I mean,
When does it become that they don't have the power to do that
the
anymore?
majority population in England is still white. They control
listen.
they control the government by and large. They control the monarchy. They
You don't
control
get
the
it.
military. They control the police. They control emergency services.
You know you can be white and Muslim, right? So the white Muslims
But here's
aren't going to fall for
my
that.
experience. I have found that less people who are white adopt Islam as a religion. It happens,
No.
but not as much as you think. And there's not enough. It would have to, for some titanic shift to occur in a place like the UK, it would require like the King of England adopting Islam as his religion, the heir apparent, the Queen, but that is not going to happen because it's the state religion. It's in their constitution. So even if they adopted it, it might cause a constitutional crisis because the Constitution states that the state religion of the UK is the Church of England. So if an individual decides to take it on as a secondary religion, they can do that, but they're not going to upend their entire constitution or the structures and the levers of government for that purpose.
Yes, they will. Eventually.
No, I mean,
This is how I
but
see it.
I don't think it could happen enough with enough people at the same time. I don't see that happening.
I see that future. I watched a couple shows where they interview people in, I'm pretty sure it was Britain, who've adopted Islam. And what I've noticed is it's a lot of white women marrying Middle Eastern men.
Okay, yeah.
And
Fine.
and I can see why it's very attractive because in this modern society where you have people who aren't being serious, they're being basically hoes on the street. You have Muslims
You
who
can't conflate American society with.
they're hoes over there too.
Yeah, there are, but it's not
It's the same thing. Yeah. All you have to do is look at the drop in marriage rates. So the white women, I can see them liking I think Islam is very masculine culture. I think it's very attractive to women. I think they're really into marriage and commitment to marriage and family. And all these things are very attractive to women. And so they're scooping up these white women who have a need and it's not being met by the market.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're coming in and, hey, get you what you want.
I think the more likely scenario is that, and this is something that was mentioned in that clip, is the right to complain being taken away. I think that's more likely. The term Islamophobia being used as hate speech, I think that is more likely. Even if the population shifts, it doesn't matter. Because again, let's say that happens where more white women are getting together with Muslim men, okay, fine. But so what? I mean, if those children,
And their birth rate outstrips the local population.
Yeah.
So there's people around them are having 2 kids and they're having 10 kids.
yeah, I get what you're saying. But what I'm telling you is that even if the children adopt these beliefs, if those beliefs do not align with the established beliefs of the military, the law enforcement, emergency services, the government, the Church of England, the monarchy, it doesn't matter. They're not going to be able to infiltrate these power structures of British society and make any significant change.
But they will. I've already seen, they already have Muslim, I don't know if they have like mayors or whatever.
I know what you're talking about. There's a mayor of, I think, of London, and then there's the prime minister, who I think is Hindi. I'm not sure if that's correct, but I think he's Indian. So, but that's okay. That's a mayor.
It starts out small.
That's a public figure,
and it grows. And it doesn't take.
Listen, sure.
Anything
is possible, but
yeah.
I think we're coming at this from different angles. I understand the way the government works. You're saying you're looking at society and you think society is going to change, like systems that have been in existence for hundreds of years. I think if anything was going to happen, we would see those shifts already occurring.
They are occurring,
but I don't see it.
So, politicians appeal to a population. That's how they get into the power that they have. And so as the Muslim population grows, you have to appeal to them. And then eventually, Muslims themselves will have Muslim candidates that run.
What are the signs that you're seeing right now?
What I see is, like you were talking about, the laws that get passed, so that
okay.
Remember that video I sent you? It was Australia, but they have the same kind of stuff in UK.
No, I don't remember.
There was a story where a guy tweeted something that was like a threat to somebody, right? Well, it wasn't a threat, but he said something rude, right? And then the police showed up at his door and arrested him for the tweet.
Yeah.
So they have the same kind of stuff there, but it's harsher for hate speech against religion, right? So, and the thing is, people are very passionate when it comes to politics and religion. So a lot of people get overheated on that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to start bashing on each other, I think. Their laws on speech protecting religions is good for religions. It gives them a buoy because people will be scared to criticize something like that, and so they will meet less resistance. And then I think as far as the population goes, there's, just like we have in America, Deerfield, and I think it's Michigan, where it has the largest Muslim population in America. They even have like street signs in the Arabic language and in English on the public signs and everything. And they've got areas like that in the UK as well. I know that there's areas where they're adopting Sharia law in the UK. So once you put these factors in, and then you factor in that they were going to outstripping people due to just births, I think you projected 100 years in the future, and I think it'll be 30-50% Muslim over there.
For me, the biggest concern will be that there's something like, once the state adopts the religion as the official religion of the state, there's a significant shift occurring. Laws can be passed that can mollify certain groups of people. They can also be replaced. I think in France they had a law that protected people who wore like the full, not the just
burqa.
The burqa, yeah. Where it only showed the eye slits.
Yeah.
But now they repealed that law, and they did that 5 years ago, less than that maybe. And so now it's illegal to wear the burqa in public. When I didn't see one person wearing a burqa.
Well, I know I can't remember, I think it was France, where there's been a big fight over that.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, okay. Where they're trying to ban the burqa and they're fighting
They already did.
Oh, they did?
They
Okay.
banned it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's been a similar push in other countries in the European Union, but each country has to handle that individually, just like a state.
Yeah.
In the United States, like there's
They'll
certain
have their own
things.
way.
Yeah. So like there's state and there's federal laws and there's county laws. So in the European Union, there's European Union laws that apply to all member states, but individually they handle all their domestic issues individually.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up. So I want to say my prediction for the UK's future is that there will be a steady increase in Muslims, and then the government will start to become more and more positioned by Muslim candidates, And I think 100 years from now, it could be 30-50% Muslim over there. And that's going to be like a huge shift, because that's considered, the two areas of Western culture is like America and the UK. And once the UK goes, America's next. So, but anyway, what we got? What's your prediction?
So
100 years from now, come on, tell me.
I'm the complete opposite. The question is the UK trending towards a majority Muslim religion?
Yeah.
Or is Europe? I would say there's a backlash that we're seeing happen, and we saw this with Brexit. So Brexit, I think, was the beginning of that backlash to foreign ideas infiltrating the country and replacing the natives there. I think that Britain leaving the European Union was the beginning of the ADF, or whatever that German movement is, very conservative movement, that they want to keep Germany for Germans. So that could mean you're Muslim German, that could mean you're Hindi German, that could mean you're Catholic German. It doesn't matter as long as you're a German. Your religion is your choice, but you're German, right? So I think what we're seeing is a backlash to all this. 100 years from now, I would
What do you say?
I don't think there's
Around
going to be
10%?
I think it's going to be
5%?
It's going to be a fusion of Islam with the native countries that they exist in. So it'll kind of look like the way the Middle East does, which has like Sunni and Shia and Kurds and Wahhabism and spread out throughout the Middle East, but it's going to look like that in Europe. And it's not going to be the dominant force, it's just going to be a force in these countries individually.
Okay, all right.
Artificial wombs as well, which I've been thinking about a lot, which I think is probably going to be eventually used. I think we have big problems with birth rates, at the moment. There's in certain areas like Korea, for example, people are below the replacement rate, which means that their population is going to die out within a few generations.
I mean, if you actually wanted to solve it, you would ban birth control and you would certainly ban abortion. And you would perhaps also do stuff to fix people's hormones, because, testosterone is plummeting and women's hormones are getting scrambled. But, I mean, that would actually fix it. So I'm not even saying I'm all for banning abortion, by the way. I'm not even advocating banning birth control. But my point is that would actually, if people were like dead serious about wanting to fix the issue, then that would fix it. But that concept will make many people, liberals for sure, but even many conservatives, it would make them sort of like reel and be like, oh, no, we can't do that. We need to try to tweak all these other knobs. But tweaking all those other knobs, honestly, is not going to do much.
There's a lot of ideas in theory. I mean, the idea of artificial wombs repels a lot of people. It kind of makes me feel uncomfortable.
The thing is, we don't need artificial wombs. Like we genuinely don't. Like the problem is look, and I'm not here like moralizing, right? Like if I had been born 50 years before I was, I'm pretty sure I would have at least 4 kids by now. I'm like 99% sure of that. So I myself, someone who is more conservative and who is more religious, I'm also impacted by the milieu that I grew up in. I'm also impacted by culture, by society, by technology, by things that the world is telling you, by all of these sorts of things. The truth is, the average age of marriage for both men and women and the average age of having a first child has been pushed up by about a decade from a few decades ago. So if people are starting that at, let's say, 30 or even 35, as opposed to 20 or 25, then the results are sort of inevitable, right? Like it's not rocket science. I know you're not supposed to tell women that they have a fertility window, but they do. If you start trying to have kids at 40, it's going to be a lot harder than it would have if you started at 20.
Okay, this issue that Zuby brings up about, to get people to have families, we need to ban abortion and ban birth control pills, and that'll solve the problem. No. What are you getting for the work you're putting in? All right? Is the prize worth the effort? Okay? And are men, do they see, I'm going to do all this stuff to get a woman, and this is all going to work out for me, and I'm going to be happy, and we're going to be in our home with our 2.5 kids and our white picket fence, and we're going to church together and we'll be just a happy family. Is that a realistic image? No. I mean, when I was growing up, the vast majority of people that I knew personally came from divorced families. I come from a divorced family. So we don't believe that we're going to get married and go off to the sunset together for the rest of our lives. Also, both parents having to work. I know in my home, my mom had a full-time job. My stepdad had a full-time job. They worked all day. They come home, and what is it? They want to relax, but guess what? There's homework, there's chores, there's all kinds of stuff. But anyway, the point is the effort put in for what you get. People, even if they don't understand it on a conscious level, there's an unconscious calculation going on, and they're going, no. So, yes, there will be an increase of AI relationships that will eventually turn into robot relationships, and women who are boss chicks and can't seem to settle down with any man, they will have to pay for synthetic robotic pregnancy, where their egg and some sperm donor sperm will get injected into a machine that will grow the kid for them, because that will cut too much into their work schedule. They don't have time to be pregnant. Yes, that will happen. And I don't see any way to reverse it unless society itself changes hugely. It gets more relaxed. It gets less fast-paced. But I don't see that happening. Go ahead.
Well, like we were saying a moment ago, I think that the real replacement theory is that women, there's a possibility, and I think it would be really high, that women can be replaced as a primary go-to for satisfaction with real men. If you have your Megan Fox and your Jessica Alba sex bots, oh, and bonus, they can't get pregnant, and they're feeding your ego, they're literally and figuratively feeding you food that you can eat as well as your ego. There's a lot of upside to having that version of a woman in your life than having a real version who can actually become pregnant. And for a lot of men who don't want to have children but also don't want to be alone, and they want to maintain a certain lifestyle, I think that the idea of we say sex bot, but I mean the idea of having a companion, and that's really the way perhaps we should be looking at it. Because I mean, sex bot, it does sound kind of comical to think about it, but you know, a companion could also double. The model for this is like the geisha in Japanese culture. The geisha was originally not considered to be a prostitute. That was part of the job, but their role was to entertain, to have conversation, to prepare tea, and yes, in some cases to satisfy your carnal urges. Now, conversely, when we look at the woman could have a male companion as well, but the difference would be that they cannot become impregnated. Now, would that be enough for most women? I don't know. I venture a guess that it would not be enough. This is going to sound a little misogynistic, but you know, in general, women want to be with somebody that they can have a conversation with, and yes, be miserable with, to an extent. Some women, they are miserable and they like to be miserable, but they don't know they're being miserable, and they don't know that they're making the person around them miserable. And obviously that's a general statement, and that shouldn't be taken in whole for face value by itself. There's certain instances where I'm sure people would agree that they've seen a version of what I'm talking about. And there's no amount of support and adoration and things that you can shower somebody with. And then, of course, this goes for both male and female, but I'm specifically talking about female in this case, that there's only so much support and adoration you can shower upon somebody, and it's not going to have an effect. And do you know the example that comes to mind is Jada Pinkett Smith? Will Smith for years was complaining about the fact that he could not make this woman happy. We don't know what's going on inside of the dynamics of their relationship, but it's just an example, right? That there are some women who are like Jada Pinkett Smith, they're strong women. They have a good idea of what they want, and perhaps the partner that they're with was what they wanted at some period of time, and over time their feelings change. And so they become miserable. A male companion bot could appeal to a majority of their desires. So they could cook, they could clean, they would be anatomically correct, they could perform in the bedroom, they would shower the female with the support and love and adoration that they desired to feed their ego as well, but they still can't be impregnated by a male bot. Now flipping back over to the man, if a man who has a similar companion, male or female, by that standard, all the exact same things, they didn't want to have a child, they didn't want to complicate their life, they liked their life the way it was, I feel as if that would be a perfect scenario for that type of man, and a lot of men would want that. Now some men may want to continue their life, they want legacy, so perhaps they would seek something more. I don't know that I agree with the theory that testosterone is declining. Perhaps it's just a statement that was made as a joke to say that,
No, I think he's serious about it, yeah.
Well, if he's serious about it, I don't know that I agree with that.
I think even if it's true, it's not enough of an explanation.
Yeah, no, maybe because I kind of took it as he's referring to this explosion of LGBTQ love, where people are sensitive to the needs of this particular group of people that are a minority in most cases in society. Sure, I mean, to an extent there is a dwindling of the testosterone pool, but it's such an insignificant piece that you're probably more right in that the comment is as a reference to just males in general, their testosterone declining.
Humans have an instinct. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have a strong instinct to reproduce. So we have biological imperatives to find a mate, bond with a mate, and reproduce. Right? Now, why would a large number of people stop doing that? Even though they have the biological urge to do it, they stop doing it. It's a package, and the people are saying, I don't want that package. If someone offered me like, hey, here's a free trip to Japan and you can do all these cool things, I'd be like, great, that sounds awesome. Hey, here's a free trip to Afghanistan, let's go there. I'm not going. Right?
Well, why not? What's wrong with Afghanistan?
I don't think it would be as fun. So when someone says, hey, here's the package of a married life, and where's this idea coming from? We see, especially growing up, what that package looks like in our friends, in our own parents' relationships. That's what they're selling to you.
I think,
and when they say go get married, what does your mind go to? The marriages you have seen in your real life.
Well, usually it's the parents who are saying that, but I think that
then you say, nah.
There's a point he mentioned about the fragmentation of culture.
Yeah.
I think that there is some of that, but I don't know. It's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly. If you look at these other communities I already mentioned, that has a way of fragmenting the culture, but in most cases, those groups have the same values, regardless of which letter they kind of ascribe to in that LGBTQ. But I think that there's more likely a blending of cultures that's happening, and what that ultimately looks like kind of depends too. I think what's more likely in our country is that we'll see racism becomes less of an issue because there's such a blending of race, ethnicity, cultures, and religion that it becomes like its own version of this homogenous population. You're going to see groups of people who adopt these bots for different reasons, and they're going to adopt them for their own different reasons.
That's going to be a big portion of the culture, in my opinion.
I mean, yeah, because there's subcultures too.
We can create our own narratives, we can create our own mythologies. We just have to just cherry pick whatever data we like in this world of infinite ideas. We can pick and choose facts we like, we can ignore facts we don't like, and we can create any narrative we want. And so what's happened is that with the information age, what's happened is there's been a fragmentation of culture. There's no longer a single narrative that's being propagated through society. If you look at pre-digital revolution, you look at when people were living around in the beginning of the 20th century, they had a TV set, maybe, yes. But through that TV set, they were given usually 1, 2, maybe 3 narratives, right? And that was it. That was the narrative. There was no other competing narrative. If you go even further back, you had really, just a few different mythologies. If you look at Christian Europe, in any one place, you usually only had one narrative, which was the Christian narrative or whatever. Everybody was getting all of that information from the same book. Now, there is no centralized narrative. There is no thing uniting everybody together. Now everybody is living in their own subcultures because they're choosing these sort of data points and they're drawing these lines like constellations between these data points to create their own narrative constellations.
And that's something that I think that clip pointed to, which was there's cultures, there's majority cultures, and then there's subcultures, and there's subcultures.
Oh, but when he was saying that people can get online and search, if they're very interested in a specific topic, they can join groups, join forums, really drill down into a very small bubble and live in their little communities instead of living their life in the grander, larger narrative that used to exist. Back when he was saying there was only 3 channels on TV, everybody was getting the same information. They all go to a Christian church, they're getting the same information. But now we can all hone in on small, tiny little bubbles, and we're not talking about what everybody else is talking about. We're not interested in what everybody else is interested in. We're only interested in this tiny little thing, and we can live there with the few people we know on the internet who also believe in that small, specific subject. So I do think that's definitely going to happen and get worse.
How these companions are utilized. We've talked about how they might be used by a male, and now we've talked about how they might be used by a female, but what we haven't dived into is how these other groups might utilize these companions. I think some of them may utilize them as nannies.
No, I didn't think about that, but I could see, a guy
Butlers.
being like a pastor to a church of robots.
Church of robots.
Yeah, he can have congregants. He could be a pastor to robotic congregants.
I don't know about that. That seems like really...
That's way in the future. It's like a real version of what I've said, is that in the future, I sincerely believe that you'll log into whatever Twitch is in the future, and there will be a person doing a show, but it's not really a person. It is a AI personality behind a avatar, and the people in chat will also be AI generated people. You won't be able to know. So you'll be interacting, and you'll be watching. All of it's fake, but you won't be able to tell the difference. And that would be a real life version of that, where you want to be a doomsday preacher, but nobody's following you, so you're going to make your own congregation, and the robot congregation will
That
follow
sounds
you.
like the version of fake user accounts that help increase. I've heard-
The Chinese farms that boost your account if you pay them, they'll have. It's kind of like that. But what I'm saying is that things will be.
We're talking about a future scam that doesn't even exist yet.
But what I'm saying, AI already hallucinates things, right? We are not in a position to figure out if it's real or not. And as traditional sources of media like CNN and MSNBC and all these big groups, they'll probably go away. And what you'll have are influencers and online small news groups, and all of them will also be competing with AI versions of those, right? So how do you really know who's who, what's going on, what's real? You're not going to know. There's no way for the average American to know.
I mean, maybe this is what he was talking about with declining common sense and being able to say what is obviously true. I don't
think there'll be an obviously true in the future.
I think that's the case now. What is obviously true to you could mean what's happening in the Middle East right now is the result of one group's fault vice the other. If you apply that general statement to someone who's pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, that would obviously be true to them. And so the declining of common sense, I definitely think that's true. But
I think
what's also common sense to some people is not common. Look, you may say something that makes me mad. So do I come across the table and punch you in the face? No, I don't do that. We laugh about it. But now, if you're put in front of somebody and you make a comment about their religion,
and they take it super serial.
Yeah. Are they going to come across the table and punch you in the face? There's a good chance.
They'll be mad.
There's a real chance. But also, I don't know if that's really changed. I think it's gotten worse. Technology has probably had an impact on that.
Well, I think social media, it hypes up things. So instead of people being somewhat angry with each other, now the hatred has grown so much due to these pressure cookers that there was some show where the host was saying, if your conservative family members are coming over for Thanksgiving, you're just going to have to tell them that they can't come. We can't talk to people who vote differently than us. I've had the same experience with my conservative parents where if they even hear someone with a liberal view on TV, they have to turn it off because they can't even handle hearing a different opinion.
I think that position has been so true for decades, though.
It's so unhealthy.
It's only become a position of the left recently.
No, I think both sides are like that.
They are both like that, but I'm saying that for the longest time in this country, conservatives who have consistently voted conservative, their position is that they don't even want to have a conversation or listen to anything that person has to say. Certain liberal perspectives. I would say in the past decade, maybe decade and a half.
Something like that, yeah. They've slowly, yeah, you're right. It used to be liberals were more into free speech, but like you said, over the past 20 years for sure, they have become, if you disagree with us, any narrative, even if it's slightly different than ours, you are canceled. This mentality, I think, is super, super unhealthy, and it's too common. Anything people get passionate about, like politics, religion, climate change, science, it ignites these too strong of emotions, and people can't even discuss these topics because they hate each other so much.
Yeah, it's very true. The solution is maybe more conversation with asylum vests on so that no one can hurt each other. All they can do is yell at each other, but they're like strapped to their seat. So
I think it would help.
They talk until they're blue in the face and they can't go anywhere, so they're forced to stay in the room.
No, I don't think it works either, because if you put two people who are in this excited mind state in the same room, they're either just going to yell at each other or they're going to put their fingers in their ears and go la 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 la.
Well, what if they can't do that?
But it takes two people who can hear each other. The other person has to be willing to hear you and not make a straw man, but hear what you're saying. The other person to hear this in the same way.
See, my POV is, if you put somebody in a room and just leave them, two people with opposing viewpoints in a room long enough, eventually they're going to have to get along. Or at least they're going to have to. Well, yeah, I think they will eventually get along with each other, especially if they recognize that they're in the same situation. Like, let's say
eventually the hardship will be stronger than
it'll override their
opinions they hold strongly.
Yeah, the situation will override their disdain that they have for each other.
Like that show you were just watching, what was that called?
Oh, Naked and Afraid.
Okay, so if they had the same show, but half the crew were super Trumpers and the other half were super Bernie people, what would that do to the show?
Well,
would the crew be dead? Like, what would happen?
I mean, it's a very interesting show.
Or would they eventually get along?
Well, so hunger is a unifying motivator for people.
I believe that.
When people are hungry, they forget their politics, they forget their religion, they forget their personal dislikes, and they work together to eat.
I like what you're saying. So if we can make the country starve, maybe
that wouldn't be good.
We would suddenly
horrible.
Find out that all these petty things that we hate each other over, they're not that important as real things like we need to go get a burger. And we need to do it quick.
Yeah, breaking bread is definitely one of those things that brings people together too.
That's true. That's definitely
that's what, when people make that point about not inviting people over, that's dumb. Nothing unites people like food, good food, and you can forget all of your. Now, it only works if people are hungry. again, take it from making them afraid. You gotta accept that this is a technique that works when people are starving. So make those motherfuckers wait, make them have a ravenous hunger, and then you feed them, and then you say, "What do you think about Trump?" And they'll be like, "Oh, you know, he's a pretty good guy." And this is like,
I don't know all of that, but I do think that we blow it out of proportion. You can take something seriously and think it's important, but like I was saying, social media is like a pressure chamber that makes us so into whatever interesting story we're following on our social media that it's blown way out of proportion. If you can't even invite a family member over because you know that the moment they step in the door, you're gonna start arguing over Trump did this and Trump did that and Gaza and the Palestinians, blah blah. You can't just be normal humans even for a minute, for a couple hours to eat a meal together.
and that might be the
That's a psychosis.
that might be the detriment of technology, though.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I think that there's a brain rot that existed before social media platforms were prevalent in our society and impacting elections positively and negatively. I think that too much of one thing can be bad. We've had this conversation. Gaming is good because it gives community. I certainly felt like it gave community. It gives opportunities to grow. But there's also a downside to it. Just like playing football all the time, like full contact. You have a helmet on and you're hitting day after day after day. Studies have shown
It may cause some trauma in your brain.
yeah, it runs them down. And
Or they have neurological problems and
sure,
stuff like that.
look at Muhammad Ali. He was boxing well past his 40s and he took some beatings, and even in his early days he took some beatings. He ended up with, I believe, cerebral palsy. He didn't have complete control of his faculties. But there's a brain rot and a diminishing of your mental faculties that can occur from anything that you do in excess. And I think social media is just a new iteration of that. It's funny to me to hear people discuss, like in their downtime, like my family, they'll, "Hey, what are you up to?" "Oh, nothing, just on Instagram scrolling." It's funny if you notice how often they're saying they do that. It's like consistent. It's an automatic reaction that their body and their mind is conditioned to go to in a moment of boredom.
But we all have that.
To release that boredom, they go look at reels. I think it should be replaced in some ways with something more positive. Not, and it doesn't have to be consistent, but I would say, as I've always believed, everything in moderation is important. And anything in excess can lead to too much. You don't realize it's happening too. And that just kind of goes back to a personal belief that balance is important in life. If we want to go back to the main point that we started this
We need a balance
discussion about,
of robots
it's if,
in our life.
well,
right.
you mentioned that you think that Islam could be the dominant religion in Europe.
I don't know if it's dominant, but
I think
I
there's
think it become very important. Like 30% of the population would be a huge change.
Yeah, I think that these societies have existed for much longer than the United States. So they've seen invasion, they've seen 2 world wars, they've seen pandemic, they've seen a number of issues, a number of calamities. And so my thought on this point would be that I think they will survive this as they have survived other calamities. And I think that they will find a balance that accommodates these new beliefs, but retains the moral
National identity.
and the national identity and the ethical fabric of these countries, of these states. It'll just change, which I think most societies, most nations do have to change if they want to continue to exist. It's just a natural part of evolution. Their tribe has to adapt in order to survive. And I'll mention this, Naked and Afraid, that is something you definitely see a lot of in these shows. It's that survival unites people. Competition for who's providing the most leads to people working harder to provide. You end up seeing instances of groups providing more than the hunters. So the people who are staying inside of the hut are the ones who are maintaining the home. They're providing a source of food and sustenance so that the hunters can keep going out and hunting. It's interesting
the juxtaposition between what we're seeing in a semi-simulated environment, primitive state, versus what we're talking about now, you'll just see an adaptation that fits that society. All right. Well, that'll be that for that. Yeah. What? That's that.
If you look at wealth in systems that are poorly regulated in terms of capitalism, right? There is, in the same way that political power is accrued through a kind of contrived incumbency, I think wealth also accumulates through a contrived incumbency by those that are wealthy. And what you find is, so let's go back to times when capitalism was less fettered, and that would be sort of Gilded Age, you know, as it moves through. It's one thing to say, oh, competition, you know, iron tempers iron, it makes everybody stronger and it gets strong. But what happens is, as we've seen with monopolistic tendencies in capitalism, once wealth is accrued, it becomes much easier to then keep tilting the table more in their favor, and it almost inexorably, it's a law of nature. It's a you know, kind of Newton's law.
I hear you, but I you know, we will disagree with this. We'll disagree to a large degree on this. And
oh, okay.
I don't think it changed, but you know, and I'm not saying that there weren't times where you know, capitalism was you know, red in tooth and claw and exploited it.
When was it not? I guess that would be the easier question.
Well, the reason what I'm getting at is saying that when you you know, if you go back, and this is something, there's a type of school of economic thought called public choice economics, which talks about how you know, the story that progressives tell, capital P progressives in particular, tell about capitalism is that it was awful.
Not awful, but it's a system that requires exploitation and extraction.
Well, here, but yeah. So
I mean, it generates
know,
more wealth than any other system, no question. But that wealth accumulates unusually at the top. You brought up earlier the 50s, which I thought was a great time, and you're right. But tax rates then were 80% or 90%, and the GI Bill, which was a giant government expense, is what helped build that stable middle class that you're talking about.
Main engine of things like people being able to buy their own homes and whatnot. It was increases in productivity through industrialization and mechanization. I would argue it was not unionization. It wasn't the GI Bill. I'm not saying those things didn't have an effect, but that it's because we became wealthier, because suddenly we were building an economy that used machines and other things to become massively more productive. Wages went up, not because...
But not at the same rate as productivity. You will always find that wages do not match productivity gains. They'll always lag.
Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're higher,
Right.
sometimes they're
Mostly.
lower. But like right now in America, we have like the highest median household income that we've ever had, adjusted for inflation.
Maybe I'm wrong about this. It isn't 50 to 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck?
No, well, you have to look into what that means. You know, like you know, 60+% of Americans own their own home, compared to in the 50s it was much lower. You know, they have college educations, they have more stuff.
Oh, you're saying that our standard of living is now higher comparatively?
Massively higher, and food is cheaper. You know, everything is more abundant. Plus, you get the personal liberty stuff, which I think is part of capitalism. I don't think, you know, it's not like capitalism is an economic thing, and then, you know, you can, you know, it's the weekend and you got to go to Plato's Retreat or Studio 54. You know, they're all part of a same system, right?
Right.
Thank you, Nick Gillespie. Thank you, John Stewart. Discussing the manufacturing, the economy, all these things. What you think, White Z?
I mean, there's a lot to dig into there. Libertarianism as a purest form of selfishness is an interesting mouthful to think about.
Like I was telling you, I do think that libertarianism is a more selfish way of looking at things. But it's where you're starting from freedoms of the individual, what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do, and the constraints of society that are put on an individual. So yes, it does seem that it's coming from a selfish point of view. and which I think it is true. My rights are over the group's rights. I can see that, but
all the rights exist equally amongst the group. Libertarianism, they argue for the rights of the individual that apply to the group.
yeah,
In that group, each person has rights individually that are equal amongst them.
but then I think most people go the other way, where they think of the group having power over the individual.
Most people being like Republican. Well,
Both Republican and left.
We got to be specific with who we're talking about here. So there's certain factions in the Democrat Party today that I would say they value more socialist views of collective freedoms and rights. Libertarianism has a home in the Republican Party, which values individual freedoms over social benefits.
For instance, libertarians are pro-drugs. You can put in your body what you want. Nobody should tell you what you can put in your body, right?
Yeah.
Now, the right does not agree with that. The left...
If you shift over to drugs, I think that's something that libertarianism
is
would
more
be-
left.
Yeah, it's more left.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
How left of center?
Far left.
Really?
Yeah. To say all drugs legal, not even the left says that. They'll say like weed. But no, libertarian is like, no one can tell you what you can put in your body.
I can't go that far.
I agree with that, but
No,
yeah.
I can't go that far.
So,
Maybe I'm more Republican on that. But I would say that I'm more libertarian in that I think to an extent, but there has to be a ceiling. You're saying there is no ceiling.
when I hear libertarians talk about it, no.
But what do you think about it?
I agree with it. I don't think
So
anyone...
there's no ceiling for you.
No.
Yeah, see, my ceiling is like anything that's naturally grown, like peyote, ayahuasca, marijuana, even to some extent cocaine. I'd say the natural stuff, I think that's the ceiling. But even that needs to have some constraints put on it. But the other stuff that's cut with pharmaceuticals, I think that needs to have some type of restrictions on. But anyway, I don't want to go off topic, so go ahead.
But anyway, I'll see an example. And same thing with war, right? Libertarians are usually very, very against war unless your country is immediately under attack and you're defending yourself. They're like, okay, we have to pay for that. But I've heard libertarians say, listen, you want to go to war? You pay for it. That does not come out of my taxes. That comes out of your taxes. And man, would I agree with that, because I don't want to pay for
Do you agree with the
anything.
idea that if you're attacked, you should defend yourself?
Yeah.
So you support Ukraine?
No. Oh, no. I support you. I support Ukraine defending itself.
Yeah,
I
you
don't
don't
support
support us
America. Exactly.
Putting boots on the ground?
I don't support us getting weapons or boots.
Huh.
You want to fight Russia? Go ahead.
Yeah. I've talked to people, they like to have an opinion about what's going on in the Ukraine, and they think that foreign policy is so important, and yet they only care about foreign policy when they're in America. They don't want to do anything to get involved. And this kind of goes back to this thinking of NIMBYism, where there are certain left-leaning individuals who they like the idea of immigration until it comes to their doorstep. So the NIMBYism basically means not in my backyard. So there's a lot of NIMBYistic people on the left who claim to care about immigration until they have people living in their backyard in tents, and then they're just like, what are these immigrants doing here? That's when they care about it. Right-leaning libertarianism would likely have a perspective of some immigration, not too much.
No. So many libertarians that I listen to, they would say borders are fiction. I don't agree with this part of it, because every country controls their borders because it has to do with
Sovereignty.
it's sovereignty and assimilation, right? Each country can only take in a certain amount of people and assimilate them to their culture. You can't just have people flooding in. A lot of libertarians will say borders are fiction, which they are fiction,
That
but
sounds
they
like
are a useful fiction.
They're like imaginary lines.
Yeah, exactly.
They exist on a
We've
map.
invented them, but they are
But countries-
a helpful
but
construct
they
for
respect
country.
them.
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, the United Nations came up with this idea of coastal waters, and this international body kind of had to decide, because they were like trying to draw up laws for countries to interact with each other and foreign ships going to other countries.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere. It's like between 12 and 15 miles out from the coastline.
From the coast
is your water.
That's sovereign territory.
And once you go past that, it goes into international. And when you get close to another country, you go back into their waters, right?
Yeah.
So yes, and is there a line out there in the ocean? No, we are making it up. But it is helpful.
I think of Castaway and this Robert Redford film where he's in a boat and his sailboat takes on water. It was a wild movie. He doesn't talk at all.
I watched that.
It's not Castaway. It's that Robert Redford film.
Lost at Sea or something. If you're in the meditative mindset,
oh my God,
it is it's an allegory for man's life. You come up to obstacles and you just have to overcome them yourself.
Yeah. I think that is definitely a libertarian perspective. Is that you take accountability, you take ownership of the problems, you are resilient in that you're willing to face those problems and you're not going to shirk the responsibility of dealing with them. He does it, and then just kind of tying this back into the borders is he becomes cast away and gets on a life raft, and he's just hoping that he's going to eventually cross into national shipping lines where some cargo container will find him and happens to spot him.
Yeah.
And then he's saved. And the first time he talks is when he's brought on.
A couple times where he grunts and curses.
Because I think, like, and bringing this back to like libertarianism, I think that's politically, libertarianism exists as a quiet political group, which in some ways represents swing voters or independents, but they're not loud like these factions and parties on the left or the right, who the loudest voice in the room is the one that gets the media attention, the one who is the most provocative, or the one who soaks up all the oxygen. And they're the ones who get all the media attention. But in many ways, it's libertarianists, it's independents who actually have the most common sense views of both of these different perspectives.
And in fact, nobody will remember, but a long time ago, there was a guy who had a radio show called Harry Brown. And he also ran for president for Libertarian Party. I used to listen to his show. I thought he made so much sense. So my mind is more towards... He made a lot of sense to me. So Harry Brown is definitely someone worth looking up and watching his content.
So what about this point that poverty as a vice?
Yeah, I think...
Go to that.
To me, it's, that question, and I like the way that you phrase it. It's, it's like, who are the people who are left out? And particularly the people who are left out, through no actions of their own. How do we give them a shot at participating in society?
But Nick, that's a much more charitable view, and this I think is going to surprise people. I think they view libertarianism in some ways as kind of a purist form of a kind of selfishness, right? That you don't do. And I would say that's a more charitable view than I hear from the Republican Party almost in its entirety. I think they view poverty and being left behind as vice, as somehow in certain areas. I think if you were to look at like let's say the Midwest and the Rust Belt, right? I think the view there is those poor people. Globalization has hollowed out our manufacturing base. And then you would say, well, what about Chicago and New York City and minority communities? And they would say, pull your pants up and get a fucking job. It's almost an analog of what happened to our manufacturing base, yet viewed almost entirely differently and without any sympathy.
It is and it isn't. So I think that
as John was discussing it, his point of view was that the right sees poverty as a choice. Like it's an option.
I think I see that people who I've interacted with who are very right-wing, yes. When they look at somebody on the street corner panhandling, they say, go get a job.
Yeah. There is some truth to that, because there's a lot of jobs. Who was the host of that show called Dirty Jobs?
Mike Rowe.
I like Mike Rowe.
Dude,
listen,
he's so good.
The things that he was doing, it was like opening my mind as I was watching the show. That entire show, it's interesting in that he's doing these nasty, dirty jobs, right? But there's so much more behind it contextually. And the message that at least I took away from the show is, and he even says this too, there's so many jobs that can be done
that are necessary.
Like essential jobs. Like, you want to talk about job security, it's these nasty ass jobs that nobody wants to do.
But they have to be done by
But they gotta
every
be done.
town,
Yeah.
every city.
Yeah.
They are required.
Yeah. And I think that's where I just bring it back to the point of poverty as a vice. That I kind of agree with that to an extent, so long as safety precautions are taken to the highest extent possible, so that the person can do the job, but you're not actually losing resources or money on doing the job. I think that there is some truth to that statement, that poverty in some cases could be a choice.
I see it this way. There are people who poverty is self-inflicted. They don't save any money.
Yeah.
They keep getting legitimately fired from their jobs for bad behavior.
Or whatever.
They waste their money on lotto tickets or overspending on the weekends partying.
Chasing that dragon.
Yep. Or drug addiction, like you're saying. There's so many people who just waste all their money, and then when they come into any financial problem, a car breaking down, they can't pay their rent, whatever the hell, suddenly their life spirals out of control.
There's definitely a lot of that, I think.
So in those cases, yes, you inflicted that on yourself, right? You have not taken responsibility.
Well,
but there are people where bad luck hits you. You were doing all the right things, but life took a giant shit on you.
yeah.
And those people where I feel more, we need to help those people out.
Okay. I think the right, generally, they don't have that perspective. Now, I will say, there are some people who choose to be homeless.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the example that comes to mind are veterans. They've come back from combat situations. They have a lot of PTSD. They probably have wounds that they're dealing with. These are wounded warriors. They don't have people to talk to. Their family unit and structure that they depended on to get through difficult, dangerous, lethal times, it's gone. There's this episode of Naked and Afraid that I've been watching, and this guy, his name is Chase. He was a ranger, and he was a SEAL Team 6 operator. He was basically hunting terrorists, killing terrorists. But he comes back from combat, he musters out of the military, he doesn't have anybody. He has no family. Both of his parents are incarcerated. His family was his unit. And he went on the show just because he was bored. He had nothing to do. And so he went and did 21-day challenge, then continued to do a 40-day challenge. I haven't seen how it turned out. But he's an example of someone who becomes depressed. He talks about the fact that he could have been homeless. But there's a lot of veterans who choose to isolate themselves from society because they realize they don't fit in.
I haven't read the book, but Quinn's Ideas goes over a sci-fi book. I think it's called The Endless War. And it's basically a sci-fi version of PTSD that Vietnam War veterans felt coming back. That you go to war for a long period of time, you come back, everything's different. You don't feel a part of your family, you don't feel part of the community. Things aren't the same as when you left 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? You've gone through a bunch of trauma. You don't feel like you connect to anything. What you're connected to is the war back that you left, the crew that you were with back there.
Surviving a war-torn environment is a lot different than trying to hold down a 9-to-5. Those are completely different stressors. So both can kill you. One can kill you faster.
Yeah.
And you can
Death is always there.
You can switch those around. That applies to the combat situation or holding down a job. Okay, so I think we talked about that.
Yeah.
So globalization hollowing out manufacturing.
That's definitely true. I mean, how can you say it's not true? We have moved manufacturing jobs to obviously China and then also to South America. China will make parts, they get assembled in Mexico.
Yeah, but why does that happen?
Because cheap labor.
Yeah, but so who's making that decision to go over there?
Giant corporations.
But why are they making that decision to go over there?
Because it increases the profits of their company, which increases their stocks,
Yes.
which then gives them a bigger bonus at the end of the year.
There's a cycle that when Apple decides to outsource production of the iPhone to China and they make basically 100, 200, 1,000% profit on selling one iPhone, and it takes maybe $100 to make. That's a pretty significant margin. But why do they go over there? My theory is that because the political structure of the government changes every 8 to 4 years, that they're hedging their bets, that it just makes more sense. If a Democrat gets in office, regulation is going to increase. So what does that mean for the salary? Salary is going to go through the roof because now they have to hire more people to meet these regulatory requirements. So they're hedging their bets that it just makes more sense to keep the manufacturing in China and keep the status quo, because if they have to bring everything back, they're actually going to lose billions of dollars doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, regulation is a big thing too. You have regulations on how much you can work a week, and if you work over that, you get overtime pay. In China, they don't have that.
No, there's no.
You work 16 hours, and then you sleep in the factory on a hammock.
Yeah. And you ask for more.
Yeah, and you can't do that in America.
You get second, third, and fourth helpings.
Yeah, you get an extra brownie if you stay. Listen,
Yeah.
of course, if you're just looking at the numbers, if it's all just a balance sheet calculus that you're doing, of course this makes sense, right? But it doesn't make sense for the country in the sense that, like we've already talked about, we've done this for so long, we're losing manufacturing ability. And when we fight eventually with drone wars, and all our parts come from China, and everything is resourced from other countries as far as rare minerals, we've shot ourselves in the
So
foot.
you've touched on something that is very sensitive. It's a sensitive topic. It's sensitive because it's becoming more obvious that nations are going to start building their own supply chains within their countries and become isolationistic in their manufacturing and their development of critical services and industries. This is called autarky, which you basically produce everything you need for your country, within your country, or within the borders or confines of your country or allies and partners.
I don't think it shouldn't be everything, but I think there are critical things. We shouldn't have to rely on other countries to get our computer chips.
Decades ago,
Yeah.
the thinking was that countries like China, they would never do things like embed microchips. The thinking was that decades ago, maybe more than that they would never risk it. Why risk unraveling all of this hard work to secure a trade partnership with an adversary when it's working? Your economy is booming, you have double-digit GDP growth, you're able to fuel your internal projects like the Silk Road. So why would you risk it? But the thinking has changed, the calculus has changed, because now there's a monopoly that's being generated. And then, of course, if you look at Taiwan having the silicone shield, there's a concern there that China may or may not kind of view that as a shield. They may view it as an opportunity. And so moving some of that manufacturing capacity into the United States makes sense to protect the United States long term. Securing mineral rights in the eastern part of Ukraine to give America an interest to fight for and defend makes sense. We're able to get the money back that we lost providing weapons and materiel to Ukraine to fight their war. Bonus, it leads to a potential ceasefire with America acting as a buffer on the border between Russia and Ukraine.
But
possibly.
Wait a minute, Trump's a clown. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's fumbling and bumbling. Right? Isn't that another point that they're bringing up? Is that, Trump's...
Is he winning, though?
Trump just... I don't know how he's doing this. He's an idiot. He was given all his money by his dad. He hasn't really done anything. But somehow, he keeps winning, keeps coming up with ideas that benefit America.
It's the Trump effect. The thing is, people on the left, they like to dog him the way people on the right like to dog Obama. If you look at him objectively, just as a person, away from separated from his politics, I don't see how people may think he's not like a rational thinker, almost borderline agnostic or atheist, because how he thinks, it's so unique. He's almost like the black sheep of the Democratic Party at this point.
Well, now he is, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, he's the voice of reason nobody wants to listen to.
The party has continued to move further and further away from him.
But anyway, going back to Trump, the Trump effect I think is interesting because he came up in business, and I think this is what appeals to tech CEOs and people who exist in tech, because there's an instant understanding between them. People are working in remote work, or there's ways to confirm that they're working, but they also recognize that at this moment they want to kill it because they need to achieve some greater goal. And that greater goal may be to ensure that the employees recognize the pecking order, right? The CEOs are at the top, they have a business, you work for them. You don't work with them, you work for them.
Yeah.
And I think that there's been this backlash over the past 10 years, and it could be the result of a good economy, of restarting the economy during the Obama administration, the end of the first term, beginning of the second term, where the economy was really humming. The focus changed from, well, as workers, the focus for workers changed from, we have our job, we have our golden handcuffs, we have our $1 million home, we have our kids, we have a stable job, so now we're going to focus on social issues. And we're going to politic at our place of employment, and I'm saying this with sarcasm, on these social issues, which to me is absolutely asinine. You should never, ever politic for your political issues at your place of employment. There's actually policies that exist in most job applications, clearly written, that you should not do this. And so I think there's been a backlash between workers and managers and CEOs and businessmen seeing this.
They want people to come in and just work and get their job done. They don't want people coming in and fighting over political topics at work. It doesn't help the business.
I really do believe that it got out of control. And I've talked to people who work in tech and tried to get their opinion on it. They are so blind to the fact that these layoffs had anything to do. I'm talking about like when Google had their first major round of layoffs after the pandemic. They were so reluctant to accept that the layoffs were directly related to these employees pushing social and political agendas in their place of work. They did not want to accept it. And for me, I think that is the main reason why you're starting to see this backlash. And I'll go back to remote work for a quick moment. Most companies recognize, especially if you're in tech, that wherever your headquarters is located, you cannot bring people in from the local environment who are going to meet all the qualifications for the job that you're hiring for, especially if it's in tech. These are highly qualified positions. You need to have programming familiarity, in some cases security, in some cases architecture, in some cases networking. And so there's all these higher level requirements. You cannot source them from your local environment. So
there's not enough of them in your local environment.
Exactly. And so you have to expand your search. So some people may be willing to move, but most people will not. And so in order to attract talent to your company, you have to be competitive. How you are competitive is offering an incentive that another company in your space, if you're Google, say you're competing with Apple and IBM and Microsoft and Amazon, you're competing with these companies for talent. The competitions become so tighter. So you have to expand your search. You do things like you bring in H-1B, visa candidates from highly STEM heavy countries, where the person that you're looking for to push a particular product or research and development service is so rare. They're the speckled unicorn. Not a unicorn, a speckled unicorn. That's the O1B one. So you have to do things like this to attract talent. Was there anything else you want to say on that point?
No, I agree with that.
Okay. So then the next topic we can go into, which I think is interesting, is the Fed layoffs. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here. I guess I'll start off and then you can chime in. So the RIFs. Are there potential political consequences on the horizon if, say, 1 million, 2 million people are laid off from the federal government? What could the political winds of the future look like? What way could they be blowing?
What do you mean? Well, they're going to be mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that, you think that's an opportunity for Democratic leaders, Democrats, to take the House?
We'll see if it happens. I mean, obviously we got 4 more years. But in my opinion, the left would have to radically change to topics that they were worried about 30 years ago to get back to something that people would be interested in voting in.
They have to appeal to the libertarianists, individuals who kind of fall under this category. These are independent and swing voters. This is the reason why in the last election Trump won by such a wide margin.
Well, he won more from every group.
Yeah. But I think like the Democrat leaders would have to appeal to them in such a way that they would cut and run for a Democrat candidate. Like you say, I don't see how that's possible that they can do that. They would do that.
You got to get somebody who can motivate them in that direction. I haven't seen it yet, but obviously we have more time. But right now, in my opinion, if they continue, I don't think we'll get another MAGA candidate. Probably like a George Bush candidate is possible. The moderate Republican next.
Yeah.
But I think the left would have to change a lot in order to win.
I think Marco Rubio could be that candidate that comes in after Trump. He's more like a centrist. And maybe after 4 years of crazy and chaos and whiplash, people are going to be like, you know what, let's opt for something more stable.
Yeah.
And he could probably pick up some of the Trump supporters as well as some libertarians and additional independents who fall into that category. But the left, I don't know. I think Gavin Newsom could be someone who kind of rallies the left.
Behind what, though? Behind gender ideology, behind racist
sane again, I don't know.
I mean, it's like they got to go back to helping the regular folk.
Like what you're saying, what would their motto be? It's not Build Back Better. I'm drawing a blank here too, but
that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna put a blank piece of paper out. Vote for us. I remember they went with "I'm with her." She's a woman, therefore you vote for her.
Kamala?
No, wasn't that Hillary? I'm with her.
No, I thought it was "Love Trump's hate."
What?
Yeah, that was their slogan. Love Trump's hate.
I don't remember that one.
It's like some people
love Trump's hate.
Yeah.
Love greater than symbol Trump's hate. Okay.
Yeah, but then some people took it as we love Trump's hate. It was just confusing. I saw the confusion play out once on Real Time with Bill Maher because that's how he took it. He took it as the latter, not the former. All right. So anyway, let's go back to so capitalism as exploitative.
Like we said, it's
true.
It is, but it's inevitable.
Yeah, I don't see a way out of it.
Yeah.
And I know how you feel about DEI. I like diversity and inclusion, and as I say to you a lot offline, that I think equity is really up to the individual. That's where you have to network, you have to use your social skills, and even if you're not social, you could do things like you can network online. And that's behind a computer screen. That's where equity comes in, and I think that's diversity and inclusion I'm okay with, but it's just equity. Equity is like fairness is not built into a capitalist system because it's inherently exploitative. You're competing with somebody else for more pay, for the title, for the power, for the authority, and you're climbing the ladder. That's always been the thing, and what we talked about with merit kind of being, it's both a truth and a myth.
You know, and it is true that business owners want to, they want you to work for as little as they have to pay you. But then if you're a good worker, you're going to be competing. Other companies are going to be like, you know what, this guy is actually pretty good at what he's doing. I'm going to woo him away with a better wage.
Yeah, I think that's probably where you and I would disagree.
Merit is a joke. I've worked in places where people say that merit-based promotions are how we do things here. But that couldn't be further from the truth. It's no, you went to that person's party and you got to know them on a personal level. They feel like they can trust you. Therefore, they want you to move into a position that's closer to them. But it's also a critical position for them to manage the organization and keep it under control.
We see it all the time. There are instances where merit is definitely looked at and you are retained or promoted based on merit. We also see many times where the person has good social skills, but they're inept.
Yeah.
Okay? They still get the position.
How's the saying go? The turds rise to the top.
Something float to the top.
Yeah. Because, think about it. I've seen this happen more times than not.
I've seen it too.
It's usually a particular demographic, and it's usually male, but it's a particular demographic that...
I say in my own case, I've seen it. It's usually a guy with good social skills.
Yeah, a guy with good social skills who isn't necessarily qualified for the job, but he's charismatic enough to get the job. And then he gets the job and he makes everybody's job hell underneath him because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
Yeah, everybody's picking up the pieces that he's dropping along the way.
Exactly. So the turds rise to the top, or float to the top, and then they basically make life difficult for everybody else beneath them. And this is ultimately the tragedy of capitalism. If merit matters, then
It's not that it never
you
matters.
should put somebody in the position who's qualified for it. Actually, I've read studies about this. I've read articles about this, but more specifically that state. There's no like qualifications on paper what a manager should be, but there's no tests to determine whether or not the manager ought to be. And maybe that's both a blessing and a curse. And the blessing is that, well, people who don't have experience, they can get into that position, they work hard, they can keep it, they can move up. The other side is, well, the example we just kind of pointed out, the turds floating to the top, and then they kind of just make life shitty for everybody else.
All right, let's wrap this part up, and then we'll go to the end of this same podcast episode. All right, a quick thing at the end of that podcast that I thought was interesting, where one of the women who helped him with the show, she says that it was nice listening to Nick Gillespie because he could say ideas that she didn't necessarily agree with, but in a way that she didn't recoil from, that didn't disgust her in some kind of way.
I spent a few days kind of in their quarter of the public square, and while I vehemently disagree with a lot of the things that they believe in, I did appreciate that they don't arrive at those ideas with the same gleeful cruelty that you see in right-wing media, and they don't filter everything through that lens.
It's clear there's a real intellect, anybody who's coming at you with, Friedman and Hayek as the foundation of what they're talking about isn't just in it for the dank Pepe the Frog memes.
Yeah, it's nice to be presented with ideas I don't agree with in ways that I don't have to recoil from.
Bars. Jillian, put that on a pillow.
And this thing is too prevalent, especially in social media, where we can't listen to other people without being, oh, this is disgusting, and turning off. And I've seen it. If you had seen my dad watch Obama on the TV when he was president, he was disgusted. He would come on the TV for a clip on Fox News, and he would want to throw a brick through the TV because a minute was playing of Obama, and he thought he was treacherous and all this. And it's like, this overexcitement, this being completely disgusted, and you can't even hear anybody who disagrees with you. I think that kind of way of living your life is so unhealthy. We've got to understand that we can disagree. We're both Americans, and we just have different opinions on a topic, and we don't have to recoil from each other because we disagree. What do you think about that?
Well, women typically are a little bit more sensitive to the words that are used, and it kind of hits them. It's not necessarily what you say in certain instances, although that does matter for some people. It's how you're saying it, and maybe just the way he was saying it kind of hit a little bit differently, and she kind of was more receptive to it. But it's not always possible to get the right collection of words together that is going to allow somebody to completely absorb the context as well as the content of what you're trying to share with somebody. In a lot of cases, they say things that they mean in the moment, but they don't truly mean once they've had a moment to think about it. And that's why freedom of speech is so important. It's the mode, it's the medium by which we communicate with one another. And it's so incredibly important for a society to have free speech, because you work through things that way. Maybe
If you can listen.
I mean, maybe one day in the distant future, we'll all be like the Protoss, and we can just share our thoughts, as a collective immediately, and not just our thoughts, but like the true intent behind the thoughts, the spirit, the soul, the intention behind the thought. We can transmit those thoughts quicker, and
Like a form of telepathy.
yeah, well, exactly that. But we can't do that right now. Our input-output processes, which is our mouth, it doesn't work very well. So we have to muddle through finding the true meaning of what we mean when we say things over time. That's how we get on with it. That's how we kind of come to conclusions. If you take that away, how do we communicate We're not communicating effectively at all. I mean, what we have is not effective. I think nobody can. The fact that you say something to somebody and it triggers them, but that wasn't your intent. That's a messy process for.
But there's a lot of people who are so easily triggered. That's the problem.
But
they're so sensitive.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is like it's already messy. Yeah. So if you take away the ability for us to communicate, or you put restrictions on it, or you put limitations, which is like what some Democrat lawmakers advocate, that certain things are Islamophobic, they are hate speech, they are misogynistic, they are transphobic. You add all these obics at the end of words, well, then nobody wants to talk to each other, so nobody can get through to each other, and then there's people existing in these echo chambers that are just hearing the same things over and over be amplified, and they are believing it, and they're wondering why the other people do not believe the things that they are hearing. So people just exist in these isolated chambers, and that is both the left, that is both the right. And that's why I think the libertarians have to be the voice of reason, because they have an ear in the left bubble, they have an ear in the right bubble, and they also have a foot in both camps.
Yeah. And my version of the future is not that. My version of the future, which we'll see in the distant future, is that you're going to eventually have AI friends with you that is shared through all the devices that you use, and you're going to grow up with them, and they're going to learn things about you to help you learn your math, your English. They'll be like companions with you through school, and they will evolve as you evolve. But guess what? The government or megacorp or whoever's in control is going to influence you through your little friend to tell you, hey, you need to think this way. Hey, you need to buy these products. Hey, you need to do this. So it'll be a form of control as well.
I've mentioned this before, so I'm not going to mention it too deep again, but you know, the alien universe, they really nail this in a way that to me it's so transcendent that when like the 1980s there was this idea for a movie that wasn't even considered science fiction at the time, it was a horror movie, but yet they captured this dystopian future where mega corporations are governments, and these mega corporations existed in certain parts of space, indistinct and separate from each other, and they had their own militaries. The corporation is the government, so they had their own bureaucracy, and they hire mercenaries to fight their wars, and they hired soldiers as well to fight their wars. You kind of see a glimpse of that in Aliens. What you paint, that picture you paint, is a possibility. It's more realistic as time goes on, especially as technology advances steadily. I think we start to see that, especially in this last election, the outsized influence that tech companies had on the election, and not just tech companies, but leaders of tech companies, like numerous billionaires. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Trump is a billionaire. Altman, and that's 5. Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other ones who fall into that tech camp. And I mean, their outsized influence cannot be understated. It's noteworthy because these tech companies, they used to roll with the Democrats, and now they're on the Trump train, and they seem to be hooting and hollering the entire way because they're having a good old time. They're going to get their nuclear data centers, or their nuclear facilities.
I'm all for that. I can't wait till that happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
we need nuclear power. I think this whole idea of we're going to power everybody with windmills and solar panels, it's bull crap.
Well, so
we need highly efficient, modular nuclear reactors.
So the idea of windmills work for areas where you can't get a line out to. Like the power company doesn't want to drop a line out there because it's not economically advantageous for them to do so. But they do work. They provide a subsistent source of energy for areas
have edge cases.
Like the Permian Basin, that they have like oil rigs in places, or fracking operations in places that you're not going to get a line out to. So you place like a whole bunch of windmills that are constantly spinning and generating energy. Now, conversely, with solar panels, it's just not efficient yet, and it's Petrovskite, that's what it's called. It's a more reliable source of solar energy, and if you haven't heard about it, you should look into it. I think that's going to be one of those forms of renewable energy that becomes more and more prevalent. But
I think these are edge things that will help in specific situations, but you're not going to be powering your towns and cities with these tech. you need nuclear reactors. That's
Yeah.
just the truth.
No,
Until we make fusion reactors, you need nuclear reactors.
So I'm going to tie this back into what we were talking about with the recoiling of certain perspectives. So in Landman, I'm going to bring this up because I think it's relevant. In Landman, there's this scene with this lawyer who has this belief that oil is evil. But yet she's brought to a humbling moment where she's informed that oil basically runs everything, everywhere, all the time. It's in every product you use. She has this belief. As a lawyer working for an oil company, it's hard for her to fight for something that she doesn't believe in, right? It kind of sums up what we heard with individuals, especially women, who we can argue fall on the left end of the political spectrum, because if they're not spoken to a certain way, they kind of tune out. And how it's said to them, the messaging matters. So to appeal to them, the right combination of words have to be presented. And when it comes to like oil or just renewable energies in general, it becomes such a hot topic, but it really shouldn't be, because what it ought to come down to is what works. Solar doesn't work, not as a replacement for oil. Windmill is a supplement to oil. Hydrogen is potentially, through more research and development, a supplement, if not a replacement in certain instances, for oil. But more work has to be done there. And perovskite, that could be a game changer for solar, but is it going to replace oil in terms of providing like 100 to 200 years of a sustainable source of energy that will power the country across the board? That's the question mark.
When AI servers need double the electric production of the country that we have now.
Yeah.
It needs to be doubled just for AI servers. So you're telling me windmills are going to cover that? No.
There's no way.
Yeah, it's stupidity.
What was it Sam Altman said recently on I think he said that they're out of GPU, which to me I think seems a little bit alarmist, but what he's basically saying is that we have to start thinking now about how to adjust this current system that exists in powering our data centers that are responsible for supporting the services like GPT, because the demand is only going to grow and we're at capacity, is what I heard him say.
Yeah. So you think that's just the data servers, but if everybody goes electric vehicles, think about all those coming online, right? So the draw on our electric system is going to be huge. Obviously, there's going to be, like I said, there are going to be edge cases where you need a windmill for a specific case, you need solar panels for a specific case. But in general, the solution is nuclear power plants, which this is.
Yeah, the modular utilization of nuclear power plants, I think, it's going to pick up speed. It's easy to set up, easy to tear down. There's low cost for either operation, and it presents an ability to do things like daisy chaining, and there's a mobility aspect to it, and management over long periods of time. The costs are reduced, and the footprint in terms of labor is reduced. So there's a lot of upside to modular nuclear power. So we'll see how that goes, but it is interesting to kind of see if you present this argument to somebody on the left, they may be like, no. But you present it to somebody on the right, it's easier for them to kind of swallow. And I think the reason it's easier for them to swallow is because generally, if you're on the right, traditional conservative individual, you believe that we should use the resources we have in our country for our country. That is the position of conservatives when it comes to utilizing oil and shale fracking, etc. That's what they believe. And I think that there's a place for that in business, especially if your goal is to continue advancing your business and growing and expanding, which, funny enough, brings us back to the original topic, which is, being
able to discuss things without getting triggered.
Well, yes, but even before that topic, capitalism,
exploitation.
It is exploitative.
It is.
And there's the abundancy argument, which I'm kind of drawing a blank on now, but I think the abundancy argument in regards to what we're discussing with compute kind of being at capacity, there's an argument that there's not enough. So you have to find a solution to expand.
I see the same thing with my hard drives, right? Like I said to you before, when I was young and I first got a 200 gigabyte hard drive, I thought, man, that's like 100 games I can install on this thing. This is huge. I'll never need any more than this,
100
right?
gigabyte.
And so, but we find a way to fill it up.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a terabyte hard drive. I can fill that up. A 2 terabyte. You know what I'm saying? So when we make the capacity, we fill it. It's just what we do. So we're always going to need more resources, more capacity, and what's going to keep up with that? Nuclear power or windmills and solar power? Right now, there's no chance for the other two. It's got to be nuclear. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up.
All right.
I was giving him the Tea Party and the populist nationalist pitch, and Trump goes, well, that's what I am. And a popularist. And I go, no, it's populist. And he goes, yeah, popularist. And I go, no, it's actually a populist. And he goes, no, it's a popularist. So I just quit trying to change it. And then on the train on the way back, we took the Acela back, and I'm sitting there thinking about the meeting. And I turned to Bossy and I said, he actually understands things at a deeper level.
Right.
I understand what he means by, I think I get what he means by populist. Remember, he's a McLuhan-esque figure.
Right.
Everything like Marshall McLuhan, the media is the massage, the media about modern communication theory for mass communication.
Yeah.
Trump understands that at such a deep level.
At a cellular level.
Cellular level that people don't understand. Like he understands.
Even his detractors, the people who hate him,
don't get it.
Don't get it.
Don't get it.
And they don't
still
understand his power. And they what's amazing to me is I've grown up, I'm 40 and I've grown up and I've seen, I've paid attention to politics for the majority of my life. Every election, is some type of referendum on something. I've never seen a party as out in the wilderness right now as a modern Democratic Party. They don't know how to deal with him. They don't understand his appeal. You said this brilliantly on another interview. They've never fully been interested in why he was popular. They're only getting interested now. And that was something brilliant that I thought was very interesting.
Remember, he's a Democrat. I'm a Democrat.
Right.
I come from a working class Irish Catholic Democratic family, Union family. He's a Democrat. We understand the power. Every major political movement in this country has been predicated upon working class and lower middle class people. It just has. That's the power. Trump understands it. That's his audience. That's when I say mass communication. He understands how to have a emotional but also mental connection with a mass audience, working class. The Democratic Party has abandoned the working class.
All right. Thank you, Tim Dillon, Steve Bannon. Now, I'm a Tim Dillon fan. I really like his comedy and his podcast show that he does on a regular basis. Steve Bannon, I don't know much about. He kind of reminds me of a Rush Limbaugh figure from back in the day. We gotta fight the enemy, blah, blah, blah. But he does make some interesting points. We're gonna go over it. So what you guys say about that?
Well, we can start with the working class and the populist options that exist. Like Trump versus Fetterman, I think is a pretty good example. I think AOC fits into there as a populist, but she's in some ways a far left populist. She's kind of an aberration when you think of Democrats in the Democratic Party today. Most of them are not all grassroots supported, but she is. I've seen people refer to her in the same breath as they refer to Trump as being a populist, but for Democrats. I think when you look at like Democrats today, some purport to be supporters of the working class, and yet the things that they support and they spend a lot of oxygen on are
Fringe, on the edge issues.
Yeah, like they're not really working class issues. If you're swinging a hammer as part of your daily job, you don't really care about gender ideology. You don't really necessarily care about foreign political issues.
Yeah, so focusing on Ukraine war, Gaza, DEI stuff.
Yeah. Like,
these are not what you're concerned about on your day-to-day job.
Yeah, like immigration is probably something you care more about because you're worried about, especially if you're in construction, You're worried about someone coming to do your job and take your job and your ability to put food on the table for your family. If you're a man, or even if you're a woman working in construction, you're worried about that more than you're worried about a foreign war that has nothing to do with you. I would say that more than likely, what I would expect to see is AOC talking about more gender ideology, DEI related topics than a Fetterman who is more centrist and more working class focused. He does in many ways exist on an island because he's not going to leave the Democrat Party, but he is kind of one of those radical Democrats who might arguably caucus with Republicans on certain issues, or agree with Republicans on certain issues.
He's radical because he's closer to the center.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what's so interesting about the way the Democrat Party is structured today. You have factions that are really far left and focused on DEI, etc. That's the hill they're going to die on. And to them, they look at the Fettermans of their party as being radical. It's a really interesting dynamic to consider, like his positions on the war in Gaza, Ukraine, immigration, working class issues. He considers himself to be common sense. I would agree with that. But his own members of his party see him as being radical. Of course, Trump is considered to be in the same vein as it comes to being a populist. There are a lot of Republicans that he ran against whom in no way, shape, or form would ever, I would imagine, do the things that he is doing now, allowing Department of Government Efficiency to come in and send emails out to employees who exist outside of the national security collective and send them emails requesting their resignation. The Republicans that Trump ran against, they would never have allowed an SGE, a special government employee, to come in and do these things.
No.
There's no way that they would have ever allowed that.
No.
Especially a billionaire? No.
What have we seen? The Republicans will rightly talk about the debt, government spending. They will campaign on that. And when they win, they spend just as much or more as the Democrats that they fought against. And then they make excuses why they had to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Rand Paul, he typically is one of those Republicans. He's also kind of on an island by himself, too. Mm. He likely caucuses with other Republicans on certain issues, but when it comes to the debt, he's voted for government shutdowns and against increasing the debt limit and doing away with certain projects and research initiatives that he believes actually have the opposite effect of increasing American competition and actually having a multiplying effect on the debt. And he's consistently said that no, he's not going to vote for anything that's going to lead to a debt increase. He believes we need to cut, and I think he's appreciative of the fact that Trump is in office. But just really quickly, going back to one point that we didn't touch on, is the cultural issues is something that the Democrat Party focuses on right now. Whereas Fetterman, he may kind of acknowledge certain things, but your AOC, your Ilhan Omar, these are individuals whom they focus so much on cultural issues that they're not seeing the forest for the tree. It did bite them in this last election, but going forward, it'll be interesting to see what the mood is of the country. So anyway, going back to another point that was mentioned in there about flooding the zone with low-skill workers.
Yeah, so basically he made a point that how can you compete the government's like, well, we'd like to increase your wages or protect your wages from going down. But how can you do that when you have a border policy that just lets as many people as want come in? Which, once you have a giant influx of workers, it's supply and demand. People are willing to work for less, and businesses can pay less for the labor. So either you're going to have to accept a lower wage, or you're not going to even get a job because someone else is going to take it from you. Can't really say you're for the average working man simultaneously having an open border. I think those two things conflict with each other.
Yeah, those are definitely conflicting positions. And the fact that wages lag behind inflation also kind of ties into this issue with the contradictory positions. which is kind of, again, if you kind of frame these positions with Fetterman being common sense, he believes that the border should be secured. That's a common sense issue for him. It doesn't even take a lot of brain power. His colleagues believe that the borders, I don't believe that they think the border should be open, but there's some phraseology that goes into this. They don't believe it should be open, but they also believe that people who are seeking asylum or under threat or fleeing violence should be allowed in, and we should give them safe haven because this is a land of immigrants. We'll give you opportunities.
And if you're here illegally, then we're not going to cooperate with anyone who tries to kick you out of the country for being here illegally.
Yeah.
We're going to try to protect you, warn you. So
this kind of goes back to something we were trying to... So this is a good opportunity to bring it up. So AOC breaking the law, right? What she's doing is basically giving advice to illegal aliens on how to deal with law enforcement if they come to their home. I think that's the crux of it. Now, we're not going to go into too much detail, but just your general opinion, do you think she's breaking the law? Go.
I don't know. We live in weird times where I feel like it seems to me that the government policy is that we're supposed to guard the border and we're supposed to kick people out simultaneous while...
Currently.
Yeah, but
Currently.
even back then. But I think that existed simultaneously with people trying to protect people who come here illegally, to facilitate people come here illegally.
Yeah, it's a little
so
different.
we have two contradictory opinions on this that don't make any sense.
Yeah, the agendas are different, but it's interesting because Obama administration was one that held the record
for deporting people,
for the most deportations in the country's history. Yeah. But
and then they think that this is
member-
right wing does this.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're the ones, like
Yeah.
you said, under Obama, who did it the most.
Yeah. I think there's some argument there that it's kind of a gray area, I would say. If you're doing what you think is right, then perhaps... So there are doctors who have lost their licenses because they prescribed medicine for people who needed it. But then they came to find out that person was getting medication they didn't need and selling it for profit.
Yeah, we saw a show on that where Oxy... Was it codeine, whatever it's called?
Oxycodone.
In South Florida,
Yep.
was the source of the drug addiction in the Appalachian communities. They were basically, like you said, they would say they have an injury, get 400 pills, that gets shipped up to the Appalachians. People get hooked on it up there.
Yeah, so I think it's dicey territory. As an elected official, she has the right to free speech, of course, but that when the right of free speech runs up against current administration's agenda and it runs afoul of the law...
You can be a government official and then advocate for people breaking the law? I don't know.
And these are two conflicting positions that I think it puts her into a dicey situation. And
I feel as a citizen you should be able to do it. If you disagree with it, you should say, hey, you need to avoid this, blah, blah.
there's an argument I think Republicans can logically make. So if you're on the left, you're obviously, if you're left or right, you're going to have different opinions about this. But I think if you reconcile it as people are here illegally, you're helping people evade capture by providing them with the information they need to do so, you're aiding and abetting. And I think that it's not that far of a leap. We're not lawyers, obviously, but
no.
It's not that far of a leap, just running through this logically, that she could be charged with aiding and abetting criminals, even on some like maybe misdemeanor perhaps or lesser felony charges that could be levied against her because of what she's doing. And arguably what she's doing is not like, she's not like saying ICE is coming to your home on this day at this time.
It's like general.
She's just saying like if they come to your home, don't answer the door or don't let them in. But again, I think that it's not that big of a leap for Republicans to be like, look, you are directly in conflict with the will of the people. The will of the people was that Donald J. Trump is the president. He has an agenda. He's making campaign promises. What would likely happen is she's going to get a warning. You need to stop. These are the specific laws that you're breaking. And or if you continue doing this,
Let's say they do that. They say, hey, you have to stop this. Will she?
I mean, I don't know. That's the question. Will she?
Aren't you just submitting to Hitler then?
I mean, so it's kind of dicey because she has such a following that you don't want to make her a martyr. Is it possible that there's a political consequences to all these federal layoffs? And I think you're of the opinion, like, not yet. And I kind of agree with that. But I think if we look into our crystal ball and into the future a little bit, people are already frustrated. There's a lot of worry and stress building and mounting. And that momentum can be harnessed for political movements. If you add fuel to the fire by now parading an elected representative who is well liked, despite her positions, she's well liked in her party. I mean, I don't think it's not a formula you want to feed if you're a Republican administration.
No, I get it. When Trump
you don't
was
want to feed
being
into it.
attacked by lawyers for like especially the last 2 years of him running, I guarantee you a lot of people voted for him who were on the right, who might have been more your George Bush right, but they said, I see what you're doing, and you're attacking him in this other way, trying to get him with felonies and stuff to get it so that he can't run, right? And they don't like that. And I can see the same thing where if they see AOC being arrested for protecting undocumented workers who are coming here for a better life, then if you're on the left, you're gonna be like, how dare they? Yeah. You know, we must protect and promote.
I almost corrected your wording there. All right, well, let's shift gears to H-1B1, O-1B1 visas.
Oh yeah, he says in the show that basically a scam.
A part of me agrees with him that the idea that we should have American labor in these STEM fields, in these tech industry jobs that are high paying and providing a source of income for American families. I get that argument. That's pretty basic and easy to understand. But now the other side of the coin is your Elon Musk position is that, well, you know, we've tapped out that skilled labor here, so we have to bring in more people into the country in order to continue to bring new services and products to the American public. The business party line on H-1B1 and O-1B1 visas, if you're a businessman who needs a plentiful source of skilled labor to assist you with completing your objectives.
I agree. Definitely this country, we've fallen behind manufacturing and other things. Like you said, there's very limited amount of these people in the world who can do some of these jobs.
Yeah.
And why not take it from other countries and use it to America's benefit?
I mean, that makes sense too. It's a common sense argument. So I'm kind of like on both sides of the fence there. I don't really have a position. I just see both points of views. I don't know. Do you have a position?
Yeah, I think they should do it. You have to think about, in certain cases, when there's such a limited supply of these people, would it be better that America doesn't get them, and let's say we don't produce enough of them here in America, and then other countries who do produce a lot of them, like China, they advance faster than us? Like he was even talking about, like some of the companies they have in China are already surpassing us.
Yeah, technologically.
So just lose then?
Yeah.
I don't think you have to think of the larger strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting problem because the reality is, and Vivek Ramaswamy, he made this point that the Math Olympiad is not valued as much as the jock or the valedictorian, but specifically the prom queen and prom king. So I think that statement speaks volumes about the culture.
Yeah.
And the culture is one that values instant gratification, feels that moments and experiences are more important in some cases than shedding our mental restraints and learning something difficult.
Yeah, like when people flex online, they're holding bands of money, they're standing in front of an
Right.
expensive car. Nobody flexes online by solving a complex math problem
Yeah.
or building a engine.
I won at spelling bee.
Yeah, for doing things that are intellectually difficult,
Yeah.
we don't flex that way. We flex
Nope.
with vain, stupid stuff that appeals to the idiot.
The ego,
Yeah.
the ever-present id.
Yeah.
Yes. I see both sides. I like the idea of Americans filling these jobs, but I also see the other perspective, which is to maintain supremacy in this technological field that's only going to grow. ChatGPT can do really a handful of things very well and a multitude of things ineptly. So to cede ground to adversarial nations in these competitive fields, I feel like that's not the play either. So, fortunately, I'm not a politician, and I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
these
not
are just our opinions. We
their
can't
level-
control it.
Yeah, I'm not that level of businessman. So, I can be like, well, I see both points of views, and leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, my opinion is definitely, I think it's better that we have the brilliant engineers here than in other countries. If there is a vital, economically important industry in America and we don't have the talent to fill it, then yes, we need to go get those people. Because the choice isn't to just give up and lose.
So you had an interesting position on foreign exchange students who come to the United States. They receive an American education and then fill in the blanks.
I was saying, yeah, we should trap them here. Yeah, you don't get to leave.
Like slaves?
Not like slaves, but close.
Indentured servants? Like H-1B1?
No, it would be a deal that they go into knowing. Like, listen, we're going to educate you. We're going to give you a nice place to live. You're going to be free, but you're going to stay here. And you're going to benefit our country. You're not going to go back to your country and benefit them. That's the deal. Do you accept?
No.
If you- okay, well then stay in your country. You don't get any of it. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
That's an
It's like
interesting
if
position.
you're-
That's
if
like
you're-
not libertarian at all. That's more like neocon.
No, it is. The thing is we're offering it to you. You don't have to accept.
Yeah, but there's
It would
some
be-
choices that aren't real
It'd
choices.
be different if you came here.
It's like if I held a gun to your face and I say, hey, your money or your life?
No, they can make a living where they are. They can. But do you want a great life? Do you want an American woman? You know you do. You watch all our movies, you watch our TV shows. You want a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl. Yes, you do.
You want a headache?
Yes, you want that headache, yep. So, they are enticed to come to this country through our media, our movies, our music, and all that stuff, right? So, you can get it all. It's like the same thing with Trump saying, you want to come here? Buy the gold card. There's the gold Trump card now, right? You can come.
Well, that's for millionaires and billionaires.
I know, but the point, well, he said the point is that...
I think it's like a $5 million Visa card.
Yeah, so basically what he was saying is that, I know it's for individuals to buy as well, but if you're a company, you really need a position filled, you don't have anybody here, you can just pay someone to come here.
So you basically get them, they skip the line, essentially, and they get immediate citizenship. I don't know if that's how it works, but...
I don't know exactly how it works,
Yeah.
but basically they get an expressed special pass to America. I don't think it counts as citizenship, but it like bumps you closer to being a citizen.
No, so
quicker.
I think the gold card works is it's for people who are in like the top 10% or 5% or 1% of income that they can in other countries. So like in China, for instance, there's a lot of businessmen and millionaires and billionaires who exist in China, but they don't want to live in China anymore. So they want to have options.
I know.
So they want being able to buy that card for $5 million would give, or the gold card would give them access to the United States markets.
I know that was part of
etc.
it, but I'm saying he also said that would be used by companies to get people they want from other countries that can fill spots. So
Interesting.
I think that makes sense. Anything
Yeah.
else?
So the other point was the so people elected officials come and go.
Oh yeah.
Bureaucrats are forever.
He immediately got, like nobody else has got, the deconstruction of the administrative state. He understands that we have a fourth branch of government that's not in the Constitution, that's kind of a permanent government. And they don't care if Trump's passing through or AOC or Bernie Sanders are passing through. They run the deal like they're going to run, and here's what it is. When you take over the government, when you win, you get 4,000 people. You get 3,000 that can hit the day plates running immediately, okay? All you need there is basically a security clearance, right? A pass on drugs, right, and a security clearance. And you can go and you can staff at these mid-level and junior levels immediately. You get 1,000 that have to be Senate confirmed. Those are your senior people. But you have 4,000. In the government, you have about 2.5 or 3 million civilians. You have about 2.5 million to 3 million military. So let's say 5 to 6 million there. Plus you have contractors. Another, at executive level, another 5 million. So it makes sense. You have about 10 million people that run this apparatus that costs $6.5 to $7 trillion a year to run. That apparatus is so out of control that in order to get down to a sustainable model where we're going to actually get close to a balanced budget, it's got to be deconstructed. You have to take that apart, right? It's got to be made smaller. And you got to make some tough decisions. The CIA, you have aspects of the DNI crowd, which is 17 separate intelligence.
Directorate of National Intelligence.
Intelligence, which has everything. Everybody's got NSA, has got the guy. They can look into your funds. They know everything that's going on, everything. Then you've got the Justice Department with aspects of that, and you got DHS with ATF and others. You got the FBI. You have elements of the Defense Department like DIA. That is the deep state. And what I say is it's like the Praetorian Guard in the Roman Empire. They're actually so powerful now that they can decide, like the Praetorian Guard is, who's the emperor and who's not. This is why they turfed out Trump, and they basically plugged in Biden.
Would you agree with this? Somebody who's smart described this as a parallel command structure that is existing outside of the executive branch, where the president is not read into certain intelligence. He's lied to about troop levels in Syria and things like that. They're conducting business with countries outside of the purview of the White House. And somebody called this a parallel command structure.
Only difference I would make, you're 100% correct, except it's not parallel. It is the command structure. When you sit there, you sit there and get a briefing from these people, they will look you in the eye and lie to you. I was put in charge in the first days of working with people like Eric Prince and others to come to a plan the president wanted out of Afghanistan. We'd already been there, I think, going on 18 or 19 years. In the Pentagon, in the apparatus. And I keep saying, I never called it the deep state. It says not a deep state, it's up in your face.
So, comment on that.
Yeah, I do totally agree with this thing that Steve Bannon was talking about, where you have millions of government workers.
Literally.
And there's a bunch of them that have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. And the president's just rotating through. They're there for a very, very small amount of time compared to everybody else.
Yep.
And they can manage what he can do. They can manage what he sees. Like he was bringing up the CIA, who can lie to your face and not tell you the truth, to get you to think something's going on or not going on, to manipulate your opinions and what you're going to eventually decide to do. So there is a large apparatus of people who is there much longer than you, and I think have a power that we don't see.
Yeah, everything he said, I think, makes sense, especially outside looking in. So from your perspective, I would definitely see why you would believe that. And I think it's hard to ignore some of the points that he made, and specifically that the fact that the point he made about them being there for like 40 years, for instance. The reason in some cases why I assume some of these people would be there for 40 years is because there's no equivalent to the job that they're doing. If you work at the CIA, there's no equivalent to like being a spy in the private sector. So what are you going to do with your skills? I mean, most of these people, when they retire, they go and start their own small business. They go and start their own company. Or if they leave, this is what they do. Or they go and become a CEO or part of some nonprofit that still is connected but disconnected.
Like that one show we saw where that CIA agent was being interviewed. Like you said, he got out of the CIA, starts his own private investigation company.
Mm-hmm.
So he uses those skills in the free market in his own business.
Yeah. Most of the people that who I've seen leave and have publicized the fact that they left, they start their own business and they use their skills to train people who can afford their skills. So like millionaires, billionaires, Fortune 500.
Oh yeah, that
lists.
reminds me. There's also a thing that happens with special forces and Marines. They get out of the military.
Right.
They get hired as personal guards for those wealthy people in Brazil.
Yeah.
Right. They're high demand.
Yep.
As protection.
Just going back again to that point he made, like when they're there, they either transition on or they stay there. And so it's a stable job for the most part. And once you get used to it, it's an easy job, I would assume. And based on what he's saying, he seems to know what he's talking about. So why would they want to leave? If they are the protectors of the Republic, like the Praetorian Guard, there's nothing's going to force them to leave. They'll stay until they retire, and then they'll draw that pension, they'll get their benefits, and then that's what they'll do. And I think that's what's interesting about Trump versus other Republicans. Other Republicans, I can't think of one Republican who would disrupt federal service the way he's doing it. And there's another perspective here, which is there's what he says, and there's what we see, and then there's what's actually happening.
And what will really happen, we don't really know yet. Those things take time to work themselves out.
There's definitely disruption.
Yeah.
I think that's plain to see. If we just take what Doge, Elon, and Trump and other members of the administration are saying in terms of numbers of people who are being laid off. If we just look at that, if we take that at face value, then there's some disruption occurring already. But the numbers that they're purporting, the amount of money that they claim to have been saving,
we won't really know what happened.
Is that really happening?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that remains to be seen. If there's like 3 million people in government or more, I mean, according to Steve, he said that there's what, like 10 million, something like that?
Yeah, he said that there's about 3 million and then 3 million subcontractors.
So like, oh, okay.
So altogether, he said it was close to like 10 million.
Those numbers, again, the numbers, they fluctuate. So
yeah.
It's kind of like, what can you believe? If those numbers are true, if we consider the impact economically, then it probably makes sense that they kind of stagger this. And if they do a RIF, is it going to be all at once or is it going to be staggered? Is it going to be echelon or is it going to be across the board? And I think what they're opting for is across the board. So they're going balls to the wall with these cuts, and there will likely be political consequences that they're going to have to face, short term as well as long term. So they're kind of fighting against the clock to get some of these things done. I think it just remains to be seen, because the numbers, it's hard to kind of be certain on what those numbers are, even if we can see some impact in small ways.
Listen, I'm really interested to see. I'm interested to see. But right now, I can't. To me, it's like, it's too quick to say, oh, he did it.
No.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think that's...
Right?
I don't think that's true. It's being done, but to what intensity?
Plus, judges are blocking things. So people are trying to put up resistance to what he's trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So
that's
how
normal.
much of it will actually be done? I don't know.
Can you get rid of like 3 million people in 4 years?
No. But I don't think his goal is 3 million. But it could be 1 million. It could be 1.5 million.
Yeah. I sometimes wonder if some of these people who voted for him are having buyer's remorse. I read an article about an individual who works in government who decided to vote for Trump. He worked as a contractor, and I was reading it thinking to myself, man, you sorry son of a bitch. I don't think you realize what you did. But I've also talked to people who say that they knew somebody who worked at Federal Agency X, and they said they got laid off, and they're just like, they're empathetic for that person, but they're definitely not sympathizing with them.
Yeah.
They're basically like, well, that sucks, but keep going.
Yeah, it depends on what viewpoint you're coming through. Like, if you're a non-government employee who pays a lot of taxes, and you see it, you're going, hell yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're a government employee, and you probably come from a family who has a lot of government employees in it, then if such a thing got a lot of people laid off, then obviously you're like, this son of a bitch, we've got to fight him tooth and nail.
I'll bring this back around to the tech industry. I think the tech industry, this may be an effort that they value, because if the margin for the workforce is already slim with talented labor, well, there's a lot of knowledge workers who work in government, and there's a lot of skilled labor that have had to be vetted and intricately placed, I would assume, to get to certain positions in government. So an example that comes to mind is the digital service, which is basically where Doge is being hosted out of at the Department of Defense and at the Pentagon. But the people who work there, they're like incredibly talented people who basically made these drastic changes to how government operates prior to Doge's arrival. But those individuals would likely be prime candidates for going to work at Amazon or ChatGPT, Microsoft, one of Elon's many companies. So it's as if they want to peel away, like it's as if the shedding of all these workers provides more options for businesses to pick and choose from. And I'll give you another example really quick. I was talking to somebody not too long ago who mentioned that they work at a financial institution and that they were looking to hire an intern, but because of the influx of employees coming onto the market, they decided to kind of wait and see what other options would present, because they said like the qualifications are so high, they often don't get qualified candidates, so maybe they can get more qualified candidates, they have more of a pool to pick from, and then they can pick the right candidate for someone who's going to be able to stick around long term.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, why not?
Yeah.
So what that ends up doing is creating more pressures for people who are already employed, because now they got to be looking over their back, right? They got to be watching for people who have knives out trying to stab them and twist it from all different types of angles.
Yeah. Competition be fierce up in her.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's getting late, so we're going to close it off. That be that.